As of 2025, the world is closing in on 3,000 billionaires. Not to state the obvious, but given the number of self-made billionaires, it's statistically easier to be a billionaire than it is to make a living on the PGA Golf Tour. And they all did it by being business rich, with their billions stacking up in a short time. In fact, 10 billionaires accomplished the feat in under 4 years, including the founders of Binance, Priceline.com, Global Crossing, Groupon, Snapchat, Didi Chuxing, eBay, Amazon, Facebook, and Pinduoduo Inc., in that order. I'm Chris Volk, your business-rich host and value equation author, and the 10 fastest billionaires, together with their other self-made billionaire counterparts, did not get there by saving money or being frugal. If you've been watching, you know the foundation of investor returns lies in distributed cash, or dividends, together with 3 sources of cash flow per share growth. Those 3 sources include cash flow growth from same store or same business lines sales increases, cash flow growth arising from free cash flow that's reinvested into the business to fund expansion, and cash flow growth derived from the issuance of new shares of stock to fund added expansion, which is something that companies do when their internal resources just aren't enough. And you estimate expected investor returns just by adding the dividend yield to the combined cash flow growth per share delivered by the 3 cash flow growth per share sources. But that's just the start. The magic starts to happen when the 4 foundational return sources begin to exceed investor return expectations. So what might investor return expectations be? I start with the major stock indices to make an estimate. The S&P 500 index includes 500 of the largest companies listed on stock exchanges in the United States. Collectively, this group represents roughly 80% of the total market capitalization of U.S. public companies. Now, from 1928 through 2024, the value of the index grew at a compound annual growth rate of 6.2%. But that excludes dividends. Assuming that you received dividends and then reinvested them into the index, your return would rise to just over 10% annually. Now, what about broader stock market performance? The Russell 2000 was launched in 1984 and is comprised of US-based, smaller capitalization stocks representing about 7% of the total market capitalization of US public companies. That index realized an annual rate of return closer to 8% between 2000 and 2025, assuming reinvested dividends. Now, as a 3-time public company president and CEO, based upon the long-term performance of the S&P 500 and Russell 2000 indices, I came to the conclusion that the long-term cost of our equity was in the area of 8 to 10%. And for sure, that's adjusted daily. Only when you build a business model, you can't be thinking in terms of daily. That's because business models can't be in constant flux. So you have to be thinking longer term. For me, that meant that if we could realize returns in the area of 8% to 10%, chances are that our equity would be producing a nice rate of return, but it wouldn't be worth any more than it costs to create. But if we could do better than 8 to 10%, then our equity would be worth more than its creation cost. And the goal was to do this to the best of our ability. So let's say our target total annual investor return is 9%. There are plenty of ways to arrive at 9%. You can have a dividend yield of 3% and 6% share price appreciation arising from your 3 cash flow growth sources. You can have no dividends at all and just 9% annual per share cash flow growth rate. Or you could have other combinations of dividend yields and growth rate that add up to 9%. Now, let's say the sum of your dividends and growth sources were to total 36%. That's 4 times what a typical long-term stock investor would expect to make. In that case, your equity might have a valuation of 4 times its cost. I refer to this as an equity valuation multiplier. It's the 5th and turbocharging source of business investment returns. Basically, cash flow multiple arbitrage. It's what catapulted the richest Americans to be on the Forbes 400 list. The higher the equity value multiplier and the bigger the company, the greater the turbocharge. The world's greatest personal fortunes virtually all came from having large personal stakes in companies that addressed large markets, offering outsized cash flow per share growth potential. The result, meaningful equity value multipliers. But it's not always about the multipliers. Sometimes the billions can add up more slowly. The equity value multiplier of Walmart, the nation's largest employer and biggest bricks and mortar retailer, fell from over 6 times in 2000 to just 2 times at the end of its 2024 fiscal year in the face of business model erosion. Basically, their business model was hurt by competition from Amazon and other online retailers. But by the end of 2024, the company's equity at creation cost had grown from $38 billion in 2000 to $224 billion due to cash flow reinvestment. Multiply that number by 2 at the company's January 31st, 2024 fiscal year end, and you arrive at an equity market value of around $450 billion, with about half of that still owned by the founding Walton family. Now that you know where business returns come from and what kinds of returns stock investors expect, the question is, what are the elements of a business model that business leaders have to play with in order to deliver returns exceeding investor return expectations? Now we're getting into business model fundamentals that are at the heart of being business rich. We'll begin to explore that on our next episode. Let's dig into the numbers that matter as we consider how to make some money on the Value Equation channel. I'm Chris Volk. You can find me at ChristopherHVolk.com, and thank you for joining me on this business wealth creation journey.